Genesis chapter 50, verse 1. Then Joseph fell on his father's face and wept over him and kissed him. Okay, so again, like when Joseph earlier met his brothers, Benjamin, and then told them that he is their brother. Maybe if you correctly as well, they wept on his on the shoulders. Okay, now in this case on the face, he fell on his face and wept over. So, well, it's just a sign of this, well, of mourning. I mean, because now his father is dead. Verse 2. And Joseph commanded his servants, the physicians, to embalm his father. So the physicians embalmed Israel. So the interesting thing is here just why did he embalm his father? Was there some other change in their, we'll say, after death burial practices due to the Israel? Remember, Jesus, after his death as well, he was embalmed, or at least they wanted to embalm him. He was not, because of everything happened so fast. Well, actually he was, because Nicodemus brought all the stuff. I'm speaking of the woman who wanted to do that, and that's why they went back there on the Sunday. Okay, Sunday morning early before sunrise. But the way of embalmment as done in Egypt and the way it was done in the days or for Jesus would have been like night and day, totally something different. Okay, the reason is more of a smell involved than anything else. This is not so the body will be preserved like the Egyptian mummies kind of idea. Okay, it's not linen in the mausoleum kind of idea. Now, in this case, it was done in the way of the Egyptians, because the Egyptian physicians was asked by, and they embalmed, so they did it according to the Egyptian way of doing things. I don't think that there's anything else but the fact that this was this had to do with the fact that it was kind of now for him in his standing, and for Jacob as his father in their standing, kind of the thing to do. Okay, if this would have broken God's law, then I'm sure he would not have done this. But this is not breaking God's law at all. Okay, if you want to embalm your body after death so that Jesus will raise it from the dead. I know there's a huge question concerning to have your body destroyed after death, cremated. I know lots of very conservative, well, sometimes less conservative, but reformed, especially reformed people, that they are totally against it. We're not supposed to burn our bodies. But then I know lots of reformed churches in South Africa, they do that. Cremation. Now, it doesn't mean a lot if the church in South Africa, Reformed Church in South Africa, does something, because they are so off the road these days with their liberal theology. You can't believe it. Not all of them, but yeah, unluckily. But anyhow, so that's not the question I want to really discuss here. I don't want to go. We can in the later stage get on into that, but not so much now. So this is therefore not a question. Our body is not evil. Okay. People here in Buddhist culture, Hindu culture, think our bodies is evil, matter is evil. So cremation to get rid of this evil kind of idea, right? While for Christians, we don't see our bodies as evil. Matter was made by God, so it's not evil. The problem is that the matter is not the atoms, the problem is us. Okay, so cremating your body and getting rid of matter is not getting rid of your soul, which is the problem, actual fact. The part which only Jesus and God could. So no, matter is not bad. Matter is good, created by God. That is very important. So for a long story, but what I'm trying to just get at is this, because a question might arise. So is he then now just following the ways of the Egyptians, their religious ways? Okay, so I don't think so for 1 second, because if it was just following the religious ways, if this would have meant following their ways, I'm sure Joseph would not have gone for this, and Jacob himself would have said, no way, you're going to embalm me after death. But there's no mention of that, It was just about the place to be buried and not of the way to be buried. That was important to Jacob. Because ultimately he knows, although then, but we do know that there's life after death, like Jesus explained. Okay, we're not Sadducees. And so, therefore, Jacob didn't know and didn't understand it yet, but we know that deeper meaning. So, it's the preservation, in some sense, of the body for the resurrection, kind of like that is Jesus, is not a bad thing. But I'm not proposing here that Christians need to start embalming the bodies and be mummies and stuff like that, because this is an exception for Jacob. And the way it was done for Jesus and others would have been, or not only would have been, was totally different. Verse 3, 40 days were required for it, for that is how many are required for embalming. And the Egyptians wept for him 70 days. So yes, he was like totally accepted by the Egyptians, as due to the status of Joseph as one of theirs. Okay, so remember, they were like living in the land of Goshen. Why? Because they are an abomination, they're shepherds. Now seemingly, again, due to Joseph and his influence, things changed and they were more accepting of them. So that by the time of his death, they were willing to go to such lengths to honor him as one of their own in death. Right? So it is a total different view on them then. And I think what Moses is kind of trying to get at here is just this point, okay? So that earlier there was this rejection, now there's an acceptance of. They're not outsiders anymore. They're now like treated as like the Egyptians. I'm not speaking of in a theological way, I'm speaking of a cultural way. They're treating as equals, which would be an important point in how they're going to be treated later on. Right? If later on in Exodus, well, we'll wait a bit before we get to Exodus, it will be a while, we see how they're treated as slaves, not as equals, but as slaves. Right? None of them were embalmed. Okay? None of them would have been. They would have just been, their kids, their babies were thrown into the river Nile, drowned in the Nile. Okay? And so you see, what I think Moses is therefore trying to get at is by pointing out how they accepted him, how at Jacob, Israel's death, they made such a great point to show that they are part and accepted culturally by the Egyptians. So therefore, when the Egyptians made them slaves, the Egyptians were breaking, well, their own way of doing things, how they accepted them before, now they're treating them as slaves. That's not the way you go about things, right? So I think this is the main reason as well. Yes, sure, this happened, but Joseph is making, or sorry, not Joseph, Moses is making such a great point of exactly how all of this is done, so as to show that they were accepted by Egyptians, not as slaves, but as equals. And they treated them equally, like when Israel died here and the way he was treated. And that is an important point to make, to compare with how, to show how evil the current Pharaoh is by treating them as slaves, compared to the Pharaoh then treating them as equals. That's a point I think they make. The other just understandably interesting thing is for the historically correct, right? And how this point, which Moses years later would have seen play out as well. He could have reminded, but this is how they did it then, this is how they're doing it now, 200 years later, nothing really in that sense kind of changed. So the acceptance then, the acceptance here, it's all the same. We ought to be accepted. So why the reason we are in this situation is not because of anything we did wrong. It's because it's going to say they forgot about Joseph. Because the Egyptians changed. Not they, the Egyptians changed. So they are wrong. Okay. Yeah. 40 days embalming, sure, that's not what they planned to do even with Jesus. Not at all. And weeping for 70 days. So again, it shows us the highest level of acceptance. It would show them as like a Pharaoh dying, basically.